my we'll call it luck, I put my antenna out and I drew him into my life was when I was a teenager and I met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was who he's died in 2008. But when I was a teenager, I met him, and he uh, taught me to meditate in his way that was not focusing. And so I think historically he's going to be known thousands of years from now as the first guru who said, no, you don't need to focus on a mandala. You don't need to focus on a mantra. You don't need to, focus. Don't need to hold your mind. In other words, when I say focus, don't need to hold your mind. You actually allow your mind to wander and go here and there, and then come back to this simple technique. So I've taken the technique that I learned from him. I've made it easier. I've removed all the cultural trappings from the teaching because it doesn't have to look Indian or this or that or whatever. So that's how I teach in 70 countries now, all different religions and atheists, agnostics. It doesn't matter what the cultural religious, backgrounds of the people are.
Welcome to Cosmic Conversations, hosted through Conscious Awakening Network. I'm Patricia Walls, and I'm honored to be your host. Cosmic Conversations airs every Tuesday, so tune in next Tuesday, and after that, we always have exciting and interesting guests where we share intimate conversations with visionaries, teachers, healers, artists, and forward-thinking souls who are actively shaping this new earth. Conscious Awakening Network, or CAN to some people, is a transformational multimedia platform devoted to accelerating spiritual evolution, activating your highest potential, and expanding global consciousness through seminars, webinars, and exclusive programming. We bring together a powerful collection of guides and wisdom keepers, supporting multidimensional awakening and embodied truth. And today, as you can see, I'm excited to welcome Kelvin Chin. Kelvin is an author, a meditation teacher, a life after life expert, and executive director of Turning Within Meditation and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundations. He is internationally recognized. He's taught meditation at West Point, the U.S. Army, and to thousands in 70 countries. His books are Overcoming the Fear of Death, Marcus Aurelius Updated, and After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives, that describes his past life traumas, his past life memories, reaching back some 6,000 years, and what they have taught him about himself and our universe. Kelvin is also a former lawyer and graduate of Dartmouth, Yale, and Boston College of Law. Kelvin, I'm so excited that you're here to share with us today. Welcome.
Thanks, Patricia. Great to be here. By the way, just before we get started, you slipped up and said my past life traumas. Have I had past life traumas? Yes.
I think we all have, haven't we?
So it wasn't actually part of my bio, but I just want to let people know that yeah, nobody gets here unscathed, I think. But can we learn from them is the thing. That's the thing.
That's the thing. And so you are like considered an expert on meditation, right? So do
Right.
you want to talk to us about meditation and why that can be so difficult to people, for people?
Yeah, why it can be difficult for people and why it should not be difficult. That's my thing, okay? As you
Yeah.
know, you and I have had offline conversations, and you know how easily what I teach, the meditation technique that I teach, how easy it is, and it should be easy. That's my teaching right now. I'm very clear about how easy it should be, and I have gotten some understanding now about why it has been so difficult for so many people for so many thousands of years to present, as you know. So as you and I've discussed, I've had communications with the other side. So let me talk to people a little bit about where some of the information that I'm going to share today comes from. Um, First of all, as you mentioned, I have past life memories that opened up 40 something years ago when I was in my mid 20s. But in my mid 30s, I started opening up to the other side and communicating with the other side. Now, neither of those experiences, or whatever you want to call it, more than experiences, but those areas of spirituality, I guess you would call them, past life and reincarnation, or communicating with the other side, was part of my belief system back then. I did not believe in heaven. I didn't believe in reincarnation, but I started spontaneously having experiences. That said, it's very normal and natural to me now. So it's been going on 30, 40 years or more now, this communication with the other side, et cetera, et cetera. So more recently, I say more recently in my spiritual history, means in this lifetime I'm talking about, is like within the last 10 to 15 years or so, I've been communicating with some of the early, we'll call them teachers of meditation out of the Vedic tradition. So just to, in case people don't understand what the Vedic tradition, what does that mean? So the Vedic tradition is an ancient tradition, and depending on which historian you talk to, some of them will say it's 1,000 years old. Some of them will say it's 5,000 years old. Some will say it's 10,000 years old. It depends because there's not good historical records. People weren't, there was no internet, there were no libraries. Things were, a lot of it was passed down by word of mouth and so forth before people were writing, before there was anything called the printing press in the mid 1400s. So that's how recent printing really has been, printing, widespread printing, as opposed to handwriting. So, the point is this Vedic tradition is old. It's very old. And it is the root of Hinduism and Buddhism. So Buddhism is a more recent offshoot of the Vedic tradition. Now, a lot of people have heard of Buddhism and they think of it as ancient, and it is ancient relative to, you know, 21st century planet Earth right now. Yeah, it is ancient. It's, they say it's, 2,500 years old or something. That's old, okay? Especially for us in the United States, not as old if you're living in Europe, but
Right.
but Vedic tradition much older than that is the point. Okay? So that's where most meditation techniques tend to come out of, is that part of the world that we now know as the Himalayas, the Tibet area, the Himalayas, India, South Asia. Okay? Of course, back then, thousands of years ago, there were no regional and country delineations. But today's language, geographical language, that's the area. Did meditation also originate, some forms of meditation originate in Japan and China? Yes. Okay. But generally in that region in the Himalayas is even more ancient than the Chinese and the Japanese forms of meditation in Buddhism, etc. Okay. So that's the big picture, 100,000 foot view. So I spontaneously started communicating with some of these, we'll call them early Vedic seers, sages, people call them in the spiritual communities. I just refer to them as teachers, but, you know, very self-aware beings, okay? And many of them have been incarnated on planet Earth as gurus, sages, seers, whatever you want to call them, okay? In that part of the world in particular. Now, did some of them have lifetimes in other parts of the world? Yes, we could talk about that, but I don't want to digress too much. So, but mostly in that area of the world we know as India and the Himalayas. Okay. Um, One personality, I'll call him a personality because he's had many lifetimes. Um, his soul has had many lifetimes. But one personality that many people who've studied the Vedic tradition and know about some of the what are referred to in Hinduism as scriptural work, but I'll just talk to them talk to you all here more neutrally and just call them various writings, is somebody named Shankara. So Shankara, and again, historians, debate, because there are no birth records and all that kind of stuff. How long ago did Shankara live? Was it 600 years ago, 800 years ago, 1,000 years, whatever? Long time ago. But who was Shankara in a previous lifetime? Shankara was Vyasa in a previous lifetime. Those people who are familiar with the Vedic tradition and Hinduism and so forth will recognize that name Vyasa. Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata, and within the Mahabharata, which is a long story, it's a long written work, is something called the Bhagavad Gita. So many people in the West have heard of the Bhagavad Gita, Gita, the Bhagavad
Right.
Gita.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Right. And the story about Krishna and Arjuna having this terrible, internal conflict about fighting and in war and killing people, and not just killing anybody, but killing his own relatives, his cousins, his people he knows, and so forth, because they're on the other side of the proverbial fence in the dispute. Okay. That's the whole Bhagavad Gita thing. We're not going to get into that, but that's who Vyasa is. Okay, Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata, and within the Mahabharata is this shorter, it's still very long, but is the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so that's how big the Mahabharata is. He wrote. All right, that's who Vyasa is, and that's a previous lifetime of Shankara. Okay, and there's still exists in India now, the Shankaracharyas, there's four, north, south, east, and west, there's four seats of the Shankaracharya. Charya means seat. Shankara is this Shankaracharya, therefore means seat of Shankara. So it's an honorific thing named after Shankara, this ancient seer. Okay. So that's the source of what I'm going to share with you right now about where did this idea of meditation come from, just generally. Okay, that's where it came from. But what happened, according to the communications and conversations that I've had with Shankara and Vyasa and Brigu, if people know who Brigu was, see if I can spell this right, Brighu. I mean, that's how it's anglicized. Obviously, it's written in, Sanskrit, but another ancient seer. I've had communications with them, and I know who Brigu is in this lifetime, 21st century lifetime as well. But I've communicated with Shankara, who is Vyasa, and so forth, and others who are on the other side. They're not incarnated now on planet Earth. And what happened, let's say approximately, again, we're giving you approximate timelines here. 10,000 years ago, 9,000 years ago, a long time ago. Imagine this. You have these very, what I'm calling seers. Seer just means somebody who is very self-aware. Okay. So they're having this self-awareness, and it's very profound. These are very self-aware beings, and they're sitting around with their eyes closed, let's just say. This is Kelvin Chin. You guys know me a little bit. Patricia knows me. You know how informal I am. But, I'm going to informalize this, but it's just, sitting around and they're going, wow, I closed my eyes and I was like connected with everything in the universe. It's like, what? It's like animate and inanimate. In other words, alive and not alive. I just felt so connected with everything. And then one of these other seers goes, yeah, I had that experience too. I was down sitting in my cave in the Himalayas. I was down there, and it was like what we experience up here in what we call, in the West, we call heaven, right? In the afterlife, heaven, whatever. And it's like, we've had that experience here, but I've never had experience down there on Earth like this, And I sit in my cave, and I'm like, wow, I'm connected with everything. Like, how did that happen? Wow. And so that's kind of the initial thing that started happening. So they start comparing notes when they die and they go back to what we call heaven in the afterlife, and they're comparing notes. These souls, these kind of very self-aware, you could say very developed self-aware souls, and they're comparing notes. Now they don't have a biological body. Okay, when you don't have a biological body, these sorts of experiences, they're not guaranteed in heaven, but it's easier. You don't have the physical functioning, all that stuff going on, and you're not getting sick, which affects your mind and your consciousness and all of that too. Okay, when you're in heaven, but they're having these experiences down on Earth. And this is going on for, let's just say, again, don't hold me to the timeline, but ballpark, it's going on for several thousand years. Okay. And they're incarnating, they're taking turns. And it's not just one or two of them. It's like at least dozens that I know about. Maybe there's hundreds. I don't know. And they're coming down and they're coming back and they're comparing notes. And they're not talking about teaching people how to do this. They're just comparing notes. Okay. Now, fast forward, like I said, a few thousand years, somebody kind of breaks ranks, so to speak, to use, 21st century English, and he starts coming up with a technique. And they don't know how this has happened because they just kind of spontaneously started having these experiences. It's kind of like, I digress, but, Eckhart Tolle sitting on the park bench, people know who he is. And he had this dark night of the mystic, we'll call it. And he just has this moment where he's just like, he's in the present, but he doesn't know how he got there. So he starts creating these teachings, Eckhart Tolle teachings about how to do that, which are very control oriented. I digress. They started doing something similar. So it's not, I use this as them as an example, and I mention him because I'm not denigrating him. It's kind of like, you don't know. How did that happen? It was so spontaneous for them because they were already so self-aware in a sense. They're already so kind of opened up. They're not closed down like us going to the bank, waiting in the line, we're freaking out in the commuter traffic, This is not these guys, you know, who are sitting in the caves in the Himalayas. That's not their lifestyle at the time. So they're very opened up already, but they didn't know how to teach it. So one guy starts teaching, evidently. I assume it's a guy, it could be a woman, whatever. But one person starts teaching it, and then I said I assume it's a guy. Why did I assume it's a guy? Because I've only talked to guys. I haven't talked to them if they haven't told me that they were a woman. Like I remember past lives as a woman. None of these. They have a male-ish kind of personality, feel, energy wise when I talk with them. So none of them have said, "Oh, I was also a woman." But so that's why I said guys. But whatever they were in terms of gender, their personality, one of them started doing this and saying, just close your eyes. And then I don't know what the first version of this meditation teaching was, but it was what I call control oriented, because it didn't know how spontaneously to tell people to just spontaneously do something. How you can't tell somebody spontaneously to do anything. Spontaneity and doing don't go together in English, right? One is active and one's passive. So somebody started teaching that, and that's the derivation. So I say this to people because there's a lot of people out there, they think that there's some sacred or something just because it's ancient and whatever, that the progenitors, these originators of meditation, knew something special in terms of technique. And I think that's a fallacy. I think that's a fundamental fallacy. And then why, and we'll get into that later when we talk together in a minute, but why did this start getting spread this way? And I think it started getting spread this way because what started happening, again, this is thousands of years ago. We know this from some of the recorded history as well. Our recorded history on planet Earth, they say, historians tell us, it goes back about 6,000 years. So it's thousands of years old, recorded history. That the guru-disciple relationship kind of evolved, or somebody created it, whatever. And for those in the West who don't understand what that means, it's not simply a teacher-student relationship. Master-disciple or guru-disciple relationship means what the word master says. the master and the disciple. The disciple does not question the master. The master is the master. That's what master means. It's the number one person in the school or ashram or whatever you want to call it. They're the number one. You listen to that person, regard male or female. Again, there are female gurus as well. Um, you don't question them. And why is that the case in the master disciple guru disciple relationship? It's based on the assumption that the guru, the master, the number one person in the ashram is enlightened, is a perfect being. They are divine or perfect or can't make a mistake, or whatever word you want to use, however phrase you want to describe it. That's the belief system. And therefore, even when they appear to make a mistake, it's justified by saying, oh, it's just because we don't fully understand what he or she understands, and it looks like a mistake to us, but it's really not a mistake. To me, that's rationalization. But anyway, because I've been with gurus who I've clearly seen make mistakes and were mistakes. Another story. That's another story. In this lifetime, I'm talking about my 20th century lifetime, 21st century. But that's why this evolved and was passed down, these meditation techniques, as absolute truth. Because anything the disciple gets from the master or the guru is considered absolute truth. And therefore, it just keeps getting passed down and passed down and passed down. There's no questioning. It's very different. So those of you who don't know about the master-disciple relationship and have never studied anything in the Eastern traditions and are just more of a Western traditional thinker, you think, what? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to a Western thinker. It's a very different approach to learning and teaching and so forth. Okay. But that's it kind of in a nutshell. And then why did it spread to the West? I think it spreaded to the West because it spread to the West. I guess spreaded is not a word, right? I guess it spread to the spread to the West because there's a certain, I don't know, fascination, you want to call it? I don't know. Right, Patricia? There's this kind of fascination, isn't there, with in the West with the East? It seems kind of mystical and it's more ancient, it's older. So there's a certain fascination with it. It's definitely different from our Western way of thinking and approaching problem solving, et cetera, et cetera. But so for whatever reason, again, I'm not drawing a judgment here about good or bad or better or worse or whatever. I'm just saying it's different. And there is a fascination. I think most people would agree, and therefore kind of an acceptance, almost a blind acceptance in the West. And then next thing you know, there's all these meditation studios in Los Angeles and Chicago and New York City and all the United States, and then around the world and so forth and so on, in Germany and Italy and France and Canada and all over South America, et cetera, that have kind of been transported, so to speak, from the East. But, my view of meditation is very simple. If I had to describe meditation in one and I'm not talking about techniques, I'm just talking about meditation, the idea of meditating, the concept of meditation itself. If I had to describe it in very simple, short, succinct sentence, I would just say it's the mind experiencing itself. It's the mind experiencing itself. It's allowing, but I think the way I teach my students, a key word to add to that is it's allowing our mind to experience itself as opposed to forcing our mind to think in a certain way. And I think that was the conundrum, that was the difficulty, the challenge for these, go back 10,000 or 7,000 years or whatever math we want to use, a long time ago, when that first, we'll call him seer, Vedic seer, started experimenting with meditation techniques, he or she didn't know what to say. Like, what do I tell them? What do I tell them to do? Because I didn't do anything. I just closed my eyes. Maybe they told them to close their eyes and stare at a candle. I don't know. Or stare at this design I'm going to draw for you. And then we call them mandalas, or think this mantra. I'm going to give you this mantra thing. Okay. And just think that. And of course, but what are people going to do? Now, they're going to focus on it. Most people, if you just tell them to do that. But maybe that wasn't the intention by the original Vedic seers. But they didn't understand that because they didn't have to go through a process of getting from point A to point B. They just closed their eyes at one point and then they're at point B. Oh, I'm connected with everything in the universe. Like my expansion of my mind, the conscious capacity, my consciousness was so huge. But that's not where most people are at. Most people are at, what am I going to eat for dinner tonight? Can I get that oxen to plow the field and whatever, because the oxen is sick and if I don't plow the field right, in the next few weeks I'm not going to be getting any crops and I'm going to starve. And that's where that's where their thinking is at, very specific. But the guru's like, yeah, but that wasn't my experience. I just closed my eyes. So they had to come up with something. And I think that's what happened. I mean, again, this is Kelvin Chin informalizing the whole process to kind of make it digestible for us. But I think that's what happened based on my conversations with them. So I've had conversations with them, like I said, within the last 3 to 4, 5, 10 years. And this is how I kind of pieced together what they told me. So it's like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. And it also makes sense why there's so many controlling and focusing and you don't let go of the mantra and but that's not what they were teaching. They may have just given the mantra. They may have just said, here's a mandala, or this here, use a candle or whatever. But they didn't say I don't think they necessarily said, focus, focus, focus. That's kind of what has, in my opinion, devolved, not evolved, but devolved in meditation process over the subsequent several thousands of years. And then somebody in there that, you got to shave your head. Oh, you got to shave your head if you really want to be, if you really want to meditate, you got to shave your head. So you got men and women. It's not just men who are shaving their head. There are women, female monks, shaving their heads too. It's like, what's that about? Who to know? It's probably somebody had lice about 1,500 years ago, fairly recently. And then they said, I shaved my head. I don't have to scratch my head anymore. And they said, oh, wow, just shave our heads. And the next thing you know, somebody sees, hey, everybody over there in that monastery shaves their heads. They're having all these great experiences. Yeah, they're having these great experiences because they're not scratching their heads all the time when they're meditating.
Right.
So all
for me, it's, all of us are gifted. All of us are connected in different ways. And for me, people often ask me, how do you do this and how do you do that? And to answer it sometimes is really hard because you just do it naturally, right? You do it automatically, naturally. And sometimes you think everybody can do that and they can't. And a good, for instance, is one of my best friends is able to see frequencies above people's heads. And we were having one of my light language retreats. And during the break, she said, when you were working on so-and-so, I could see these frequencies above your head. And I said, you could what? And she said, I could see these frequencies above your head. And I said, how do you do that? So, I mean, isn't it the same with meditation?
Exactly.
These Vedic, these masters were able to connect in without any effort whatsoever. And someone came along and said, how do you do that? It looks so peaceful. I want that too. Tell me how you do that. And they had to start making up, well, you could do this and this and this and shave your head, by the way, because that's going to make you a better antenna.
Exactly. Exactly. No, that's a really good example of what you said, that personal example you just gave, the frequency thing.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly it. And so my we'll call it luck, my I put my antenna out and I drew him into my life was when I was a teenager and I met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was who he's died in 2008. But when I was a teenager, I met him, and he uh, taught me to meditate in his way that was not focusing. And so I think historically he's going to be known thousands of years from now as the first guru who said, no, you don't need to focus on a mandala. You don't need to focus on a mantra. You don't need to, focus. Don't need to hold your mind. In other words, when I say focus, don't need to hold your mind. You actually allow your mind to wander and go here and there, and then come back to this simple technique. So I've taken the technique that I learned from him. I've made it easier. I've removed all the cultural trappings from the teaching because it doesn't have to look Indian or this or that or whatever. So that's how I teach in 70 countries now, all different religions and atheists, agnostics. It doesn't matter what the cultural religious, backgrounds of the people are. But he's the first guy that said it should be easy and it can be easy. And so
Right.
I publicly, just like now, I give him credit for that. And I think I've thought about this a lot more because teenager when I learned that was a couple of few years ago. So I've had a few years to think about it this lifetime, and like why? How did that come up? And it's exactly what you just said, Patricia. And I'm going to paraphrase, reframe what you just said.
Sure.
It's what you just said was, but it gets automatic. But what do you do? That's exactly what you said. And I'm going to reframe that. And what that is it's taking waking state rules and applying it to what I'm referring to as, and you refer to as something that's natural and should be effortless. But but you're applying waking state rules to that. And that's logical. It kind of makes sense because people will say, well, what do you do? Well, doing is that's what we do in waking state. When we drive a car down the street. I got to put my hands on the steering wheel. I have to look through the windshield. I got to do by putting my foot on the brake pedal or the gas pedal appropriately, certain pressure. Pay attention. Paying attention is a doing. Pay attention to the traffic. That's what I call waking state rules. It's very important. I'm not denigrating it. It's very important in waking state. But when we go to sleep at night, do we apply waking state doing rules? The only doing you would do
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
go to sleep is lie down in a bed. You're doing that, I suppose. Okay, put your head on a pillow. But then what? Right? We're not doing it. The more you do at that state, the longer you stay awake all night. If you're counting sheep, why did the counting sheep thing come up? Yeah, I think it came up, hundreds of years ago, probably somebody came up with that because they did count sheep. And then eventually they get so tired that they just get exhausted and they stopped counting sheep and fell asleep. It exhausted them. But that's not a good way to get rest, is by exhausting yourself. So it's really a letting go process. And that's, to me, analogous to meditation, the way I teach it in a non-focusing way. There's a specific technique involved. It's not just letting go, because if you just tell somebody to let go, what are they going to do? They're going to obsess over the problems that they got in their life naturally. That's what's going to happen. So that's not the technique. But I think that letting go and allowing is a key element attitudinally to an easy meditation process. And that's the way myself, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, Patricia, but my daughter's teaching now. I taught my kids when they were 4 years old, and my daughter's 31 now. She's been meditating for 27 years and herself, and most of her life, and she's now teaching through my nonprofit meditation as well. But I think that
Congratulations.
waking state rules, like you said. Yeah, thank you.
So this technique that you teach, that
Mhm.
you share with others, is it something that you can demonstrate here for us, or is it too detailed, would
Dude,
take too long?
yeah, it'll take too long. And I walk people when my daughter's name is Sam. When Sam and I teach people, We walked each person through individually on day one on the phone. That's how we do it. That's how we get to 70 countries without having to get on an airplane. So on the phone or on Zoom or WhatsApp, you know, so it's a free call. Day one, 1 hour, we walk them through. And then there's 3 follow-up days with more instruction, because if we tell them everything else day one, they wouldn't remember everything. And we want people to, come back and, questions, oh, answer this and so forth, because, I've taught like 5, 6, 7,000 people now, and I know all the different questions that are going to come up, and there are different questions that come up at on different days of those first 3 days. Typically, it's very predictable, because people are having this new experience that's different from their waking, dreaming, and sleeping experience, and so naturally they're going to have certain questions that are going to come up, and there's certain ones that come up right away. But this, it's kind of a step-by-step process the way we teach it. It's the other thing I wanted to mention, and I haven't mentioned this frequently, I just started doing this literally in the last few weeks, is that I wanted to comment first about this concept of habits, and then I'm going to weave it into what we're talking about right now in terms of meditation. Okay. So,
Oh, you froze for a minute.
oh, yeah.
He'll be back in a second. Before he gets back, though, I wanted to tell everyone to.
Yeah, you're frozen on my screen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you were frozen on my screen. So I don't know if it was me or you or whatever, but I was frozen too. How about now? Is it working? Working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to say something about habits, and then I'll weave it back in to this meditation discussion that we're talking about. Okay. So, because I've been thinking about this new idea, and it's not a brand new idea, but it's maybe a new application of this old idea. People know what habits are, right? We have behavioral habits. We develop certain things. We've all experienced this. I mean, if I'm going to, let's say I'm going to my dentist's office to get my teeth cleaned, and yet it happens to, that part of the route happens to overlap with my regular daily route to go to my swimming pool. And then that day that I'm supposed to go to my dentist, I end up at my swimming pool without even realizing it, because my habit is that route is what I go on regularly to get to my swimming pool. All right.
Right.
We've all experienced kind of, weird experiences like that. That's habit, right? Well, we develop habits that are subconscious, they're unconscious, right? And so I'm reminding my students in my classes now, in this lifetime, because as you mentioned, my memories go back 6,000 to 8,000 years, a couple of dozen different lifetimes. In our continual present lifetime now, we are developing habits that are going to last into our eternal future. Other lifetimes, perhaps. We can go to the other side and stay in heaven as long as we want. But if we want to come back, we're gonna remember. But we're gonna not remember. We're gonna have subconscious habits that we don't remember. That's the point, is that they're unconscious. And then we're going to be doing stuff in the future and not remembering our past life that inserted that type of behavior into our memory bank, and it's just there in our memory bank, and we're born again, and then boom, we're doing this stuff, whatever. So I remind my students just in general, and we'll come back to meditation specifically in a second, but just remind my students that, it's good to develop good habits. It's not just good habits for you now, which is, of course, we live in a continual present. Why not develop good habits for us now? But also, for those of you who have a longer range, more strategic way of looking at your eternal journey, do it for yourself down the road too. Develop good habits. So that means hanging out with supportive people, right? People who love us, people who are kind. don't hang out with bullies. Somebody is bullying, don't, stand up to somebody if you're a bystander. Develop habits that are good because they're subconscious, they become unconscious, and they'll just exhibit themselves in our future lives. Well, same thing with meditation. That's why I teach my students that I'm teaching them a technique that is going to drop away eventually, because it's not just about technique. I'm teaching you a technique that gets you from point A to point B, because the gurus, the seers back then, 10,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago, whatever, were just like, well, they're at point B. Well, I know how to teach you how to get from A to B, because A is where you are, point A. You want to get to B, but I'm also teaching you something that's so easy that it will drop away after a while, just like hitting a tennis ball. The technique of hitting a tennis ball will also drop away. You're not going to be thinking about your grip on the racket and how far back your swing is and which way your feet are positioned in front of the tennis net and so forth on the tennis court. You're just hitting the ball. It's the same thing in life. And I think the habit of developing meditation in particular, that is in the way that I described it earlier, is just allowing our mind to experience itself. Eventually, after a while, you get to that point. Not initially. Initially, if you just went in cold day one meditation with the mind experience itself, you'll be obsessing about all your problems. So that's not going to be helpful. But having the attitude longer term in this lifetime that eventually that's what your meditation will become, I think will serve us long term as we have unconscious reactions to our lives in the future that we don't know where the habit came from. So develop a habit of meditation that eventually allows the technique to drop away. That's the summary habit, I would say, that I would encourage in people. There you go.
Well, so we have a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. We can talk a little bit more about the ease of meditation if we want, but yeah.
So there was the question that should have been posed of what are the long-term negative effects of the traditional so-called difficult meditation?
Wow, that's who asked that question? I want them to send me a private message, because that is an unusual question. Seriously, that's a great question.
Yeah,
Because they're implying that there could be a long-term negative effects, and it's true. And I've
yeah.
observed them. I have personally this lifetime observed it, and I'll give you an example. But yeah, so let me just first say, like, the controlling techniques, there's a huge range of controlling techniques. Some is just, like, as I said, focusing and holding the mind on something. But also there are techniques that are more subtle, like just think of yourself in the present. You know, I saw, speaking of Eckhart Tolle, I saw somebody sent me a YouTube clip of him on the Oprah Winfrey show. And Oprah said, "What do you mean by being in the present?" And he said something to her, and Oprah said, she said, "Oh, you mean when I'm doing my dishes?" So right there, she lost me in terms of credibility, because, Oprah doing her own dishes, I don't think so. But anyway, she said, "Oh, you mean when I'm doing my dishes, Eckhart, just to think I'm in the present?" And he said, "Yeah, no, that's just a thought that you're in the present. That's what you were talking about earlier, Patricia. That's a doing. That's an active state. Being in the present is not the same as doing in the present." So that shows you that, there's some misunderstanding about what that means there, right? About being and doing. But if you continue to do something like that, a technique like that, or another one of another variation, is just there's a Gurdjieff technique. He was popular in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and so forth. Um, and he was teaching this technique where you would just be self-aware. So you would remind yourself to be self-aware every time you said something. You would have to also have the thought in your mind quickly that you're aware of yourself, and then continue talking. But this is how I saw people speaking after they were doing that technique for several years, every day, every
Wow.
state. That's an exact, I'm not exaggerating. I was with a very bright young man. I was, young myself. I was only about 30, but he was 20, but he had been doing it for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I met him through his parents, who were I was friends with, and he was a very bright young man, but that's how he spoke. And it was very, tedious. It was fun to talk to him because he was a really bright guy, but tedious. So it can have, to answer that person's question, to summarize the answer, I would say long-term effect of controlling techniques like that can cause a lack of integration of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. A lack of integration of mind, body, emotion, and spirit, or energetic, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kathy has a question for you. Can I let her talk?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, Kathy. What's your question? You're muted.
I must have hit something accidentally.
Oh, you're good. We can hear you now.
We got
Yeah, I don't know. I must have accidentally hit something. I don't know how that works, but
You don't have a question?
um, no. I mean, I could tell you that I listen to what you're saying, but I mean, I'm just one of those people where the mind is always going. So you could tell me whatever. I do okay with guided meditation, but personally,
Yeah.
and I live where it's really noisy 24/7 for a while now. So I try to get information from everyone, but it's just difficult.
Yeah. So go on my website, set a phone call. Well, I do a free phone consultation with everybody. We'll talk about this. I can talk about it and tailor what we're talking about personally. But let me just say, it's a great thing that you mentioned. That wandering of your mind going all over the place,
Yes.
is not a barrier and should not be a barrier to meditation if the meditation teacher knows how to teach it properly. So the way Sam and I teach it, that is never a barrier. And there's a technique involved. You overlay on top of allowing the mind to go here and there. But the reason the mind is going here and there is normal and should not be interfered with. And so if you live in a noisy place, so your mind is like really, external kind of, hearing external environmental stuff, or if it's internal, we call it noise,
It's
thought.
both at this point in time.
What's that?
It's both at this point in time.
Exactly. It doesn't matter is the point. It's all part and parcel of meditating and should not be resisted, because those people who, if you've ever tried to, like a lot of people, as Patricia mentioned, I help people with fears and overcoming the fear of death in particular, but all kinds of fears. And anybody who's ever had any anxiety or fears knows that trying to push it away makes it come back 10 times stronger. It does not work. You
Right.
cannot think something.
Right.
Right? Don't think of the word hippopotamus. Now you're thinking, like, why did Kelvin say hippopotamus? You've already thought about it. You can't not think something. So that right away is a non-starter. Okay. So we teach the process in a way that you allow all that stuff to happen, and your mind will still find a way to turn within. That's why we call it turning within meditation now. your mind will still find a way to turn within if you don't force it to try to turn within. Because if you force it to try to do that, it makes more activity. Trying always makes more activity. That's
Right.
a fundamental principle of the human mind, right? Doesn't matter what it is. Forget about meditation. Trying always creates more activity. So it's counterproductive. So none of what you said is a barrier, and it's common, and everybody experiences it. And
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, and guided meditations, to your point about guided meditations, people find them easier because they are still being told what to do. That's what a guided meditation is. It involves a guide. It's either an app or a person in person. It can do it in person as well, or on Zoom, who's guiding you through. So they're still telling you what to do. There's still doing involved there, but there's a little bit less doing than what you're used to doing. So
I find it helps me to focus, is what it does for me myself personally.
exactly. And so what we teach is how to not focus.
Okay.
Because when you don't focus the mind, what happens? The mind expands automatically. See, so I teach people how to get to where the gurus are talking about, which they spontaneously happened to them, that they didn't know how that happened. But so it's teaching people how to not focus is what we essentially do. Okay. And actually it's the opposite of what 99% of the meditation techniques out there, because most of them are teaching you, oh, you got to focus more. No, you don't have to focus more. I've taught Buddhist monks who were doing Buddhist focusing meditations in their monasteries every day. And they came to me and they found me when I was teaching in Asia years ago. And they found me and I said, look, I'm not going to tell you not to do what you're doing. You're just doing what you're doing. That's okay. But just don't mix techniques. And they did what I taught, and they would all come back and say, we get so much more out of our Buddhist meditation now since we learned what I taught them. And I didn't tell them what I'm going to tell you, but I think what happened was they were focusing less in their focusing techniques based on my teaching them how to not focus in meditation. And that allowed their other technique to work better. So,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah, focusing is a limitation, isn't it?
that's what
You're limiting what you can receive. If you're focusing on this one thing, you're missing all these other things. Yeah.
That's exactly right, Patricia. That's what focusing is.
Yeah.
It is an intentional limitation. Look, I tell my students sometimes, Kelvin Chin sitting in third grade, and Miss Rogers, who I think was about 108 years old at the time, but anyway, I'm in third grade. She's probably in her 40s and 50s. But Miss Rogers says, Kelvin, pay attention, and I'm spacing out, looking out the window. Am I focusing on the blackboard or whatever she's writing on the board? No, that's what focusing is, limiting my mind to the blackboard. It's not letting my mind drift out the window and watching the birds out in the playground or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a limiting. And so the thing is, so is an analogy. Maybe this helps also, Kathy, to your point. I use this analogy from a psychology professor who shared it with his students. And I never met this psychology professor. He was at the University of Houston in Texas. But I taught one of his students years later, his PhD in psychology students, his graduate students, and who told me the story. And the story was that they came into class one day and the professor said, all you students here incorrectly think your mind is like this little 8-inch bucket sitting down on the 50-yard line in the football stadium down the street, and it seats 70,000, 80,000 people, whatever. And you think that little 8-inch bucket with 10 ping pong balls bouncing in and out is your mind. The ping pong balls are like your thoughts and emotions and feelings. And in your case, Kathy, you're hearing external noises, cars going down the street, whatever. Those are ping pong balls. He said, no. Your mind is huge. It's the rest of the football stadium. But you don't know that because you're in there. It's football stadium. It's at nighttime. no lights are on, and this little desk lamp over this little 8-inch bucket with the ping pong balls bouncing in and out, sitting down on a 50-yard line. You think that's it? No. So I've taken his analogy and I've told my students, I'm teaching you how to turn the light switches on in the rest of your football stadium, because the guided meditations are still guiding you through the ping pong balls. Okay, they're not really allowing your mind to get
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, when you get unfocused.
So Cindy has a question, and it's really kind of more related to me. Sorry, Kelvin, but it's not to say that you don't know a lot about light language yourself, because I believe that you do. So Cindy's question is, my light codes and light language came through my art, which is my vehicle for meditation. So it does tie into meditation. It activated my voice and my hands started heating up. And so, whenever we were talking about doing things automatically, intuitively, right? And then someone asked us, how do you do that? It's that way. We are all connected to the universe, and through the universe, we are all connected to our original language, which is the language of light. And through that language of light and through our connection to the universe, we receive information, a form of meditation, in my opinion. It's probably, I'm sure it's different from other people's definition of meditation, but for me, whenever I am, for instance, whenever I'm transmitting or channeling a message through the language of light, I am not doing, as Kelvin would say. I'm not doing. I have sat my little Patricia over to the side.
Yeah.
And and this is one of those things that I did naturally, and I had to, someone ask, how are you doing this? And I had to, what I did for myself was I connected with my higher self and said, okay, show me what it is that I'm doing, because I need to explain it to people. And I don't know how to explain it, because I just do it. And so what happened for me was that they slowed it down like a motion picture of sorts. And they showed me that I actually sat my little Patricia over to the side, which incidentally was something that I learned through my hypnosis training, right? I set my little Patricia over to the side, and then I connected in and said, I am willing to be a channel for light frequencies, higher light frequencies. And then I wait for that shift in my my perception, and then I just allow whatever wants to come through, which is what a lot of people who are open channels do.
Yeah.
But in that, Kelvin, maybe you want to comment on that. In that, I am putting myself into a trance of sorts, and I am connecting with a greater universe than my little Patricia universe, and I'm receiving information. So I'm not really focusing, right?
Exactly.
I'm not focusing on any one thing. I'm opening my mind to whatever wants to come through.
Right. So I'm going to explain what Patricia just shared with us. I'm going to explain it.
Okay.
Yeah, because I've had that experience many times myself, right?
Yeah.
And so I've thought about this. And so I'm going to explain it in terms of that Houston Astrodome analogy, the football stadium analogy with the 8-inch bucket part of ourselves, okay? Because what happens after I teach my students to meditate, the basic thing, first of all, a lot of barriers start getting broken, a lot of anxiety and fears and a lot of biochemistry changes. And I know this because I was a test subject in the very first medical studies when I was a teenager. It's the first medical studies ever done in the United States that were published about any kind of form of meditation. So I know what it does. So all of that happens initially. Okay. And then you're getting out of the bucket, as in the analogy and so forth, and you're starting to turn the light switches on in the rest of the football stadium. But maybe you're turning the light switches on like 10 feet away from the bucket, not 350 feet away, not 500 feet away from the bucket yet, right? Whatever. So it's gradual. It's gradual. You're turning more light switches on. So in that context, think about what Patricia just described to us. What I would say is what Patricia is describing to us when she's having this experience and she's working with client or however, whatever the context is, she's having that experience. It's like her bucket now is not even just 8 inches big. Her bucket is now 800 inches big, but she's now lit up so many seats in this 70, 80,000 seat stadium that she can see almost all the nooks and crannies in the stadium. So that's all still her mind. And then outside the stadium is the rest of the universe, okay? Because then Patricia's talking about connecting with, that which is not her, so outside the bucket. But see what she's describing, and she's wrestling with how to articulate that. I think I'm trying to give you guys a visual image of what she's describing, because her mind is not focusing. That's her 8-inch bucket, which is now, let's just make believe it's 800 inches now, her bucket, which is what happens to my students. I don't tell them usually that on day 1 or 2 or 3 of the class, but in day 4 of the class, I'll talk about that, how their bucket is actually going to get bigger too, right? Because it'll, confuse them too much at the beginning. But since we're going here in this session, I'm telling you guys, that's what happens is your conscious capacity of your, what we'll call our waking state mind, becomes a different form of waking state. That's what Patricia's wrestling with describing to you guys here, okay? Her mind is aware. If it's aware, it's a form of waking state. Now, it's not the usual waking state when she's driving a car down the street and going to shop at the supermarket. But it's a form of that, but a very different form, okay? That's why she's wrestling with it, because her mind is still aware, but she says it's kind of off on the side, because most of her awareness is in the football stadium that's still part of her mind. Hopefully I'm not losing people here, but 800 feet away from the bucket. So it's both. It's not like either or. You can have both going on at the same time, and all of which is her mind, and her mind is experiencing that, and therefore can experience the universe that's huge, that's outside that football stadium of her mind, much more easily and completely. Right? Does that help image-wise?
So it's interesting because I've published 11 books now, and sometimes it is hard for me to explain things. It is. Sometimes I know what I know, but I have a hard time explaining how I know what I know. So thank you for that explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you everybody for your questions.
If I had to just sum up in one sentence,
Sure.
Patricia, what we just described, you and your experience, and what I just described, it's a different form of thinking. Patricia is still thinking, but in a way that most people never think. And that I teach my students that is a possibility for people to move in that direction more and think in a different way. Because most people just think about in that very specific, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. But Patricia described a very, very abstract way of thinking that's still thinking.
I call it chaos magic.
Yeah. Really powerful stuff, Patricia. It's powerful.
I'm thinking in multiple dimensions at the same time. It's pretty hard sometimes.
Yes. Powerful enough.
Yeah. So do you have any last words for us, Kelvin? We're about to close. Did I miss anything? Did I forget to ask you any questions?
Good. I think we're good. And people can reach out to me, as I said earlier, to Kathy and to everybody. you know, contact me from one of my websites. Just, you see the one that when my name, turningwithin.org. Go to the contact page, set up an appointment. My calendar's there, free phone consultation about anything that I do, whether it's about meditation or past lives or, experiences of heaven that I've had, thousands of experiences on the other side, so forth, so on, etc. Feel free, reach out anytime. And yeah, here to help people. I guess one last tip for people is to not be
Yeah.
not to be too hard on ourselves, not to be so hard on ourselves that that we're all figuring stuff out and we're all helping each other figure stuff out as well, which is why, Patricia hosting this kind of thing is so beautiful. Nobody's got it all figured out. It's like we're all figuring it out. Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't hold yourself to this standard of perfection. No, we self-create, we self-inflict so much anxiety and pain on ourselves unnecessarily. So I think we need to ease up somewhat.
Right. I mean, I learn something new every day. And I think that most people, if they're listening, they learn something new every day. And you should be, right? Otherwise you're stagnant, you're stuck, your energy's not moving.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Kelvin, for joining us. I always enjoy our talks. And I believe, are you a guest are you a presenter in some of the summits that we have coming up?
I may be.
I know, I know there's so many. I think that you are. So people, please watch for that. And this episode of the podcast, all of podcast episodes are on YouTube. And so you can always go back and refer friends, who couldn't join us, refer them to YouTube so that they can watch Kelvin's presentation, his talk, his sharing with us, and check out his books, please. If you want to learn more about him and his history and his experience, I would read his books.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us today for Cosmic Conversations here on Conscious Awakening Network. And I hope that something shared with you today resonates in your body, your heart, your inner knowing, not just as information, but as remembrance, because that's what we're doing. And if you'd like to continue your journey with Conscious Awakening Network, I invite you to explore our upcoming summits. We talked about those, I believe, before we started recording. Our next summit is April 4th and 5th, and it is about field frequency and the body. It's about all types of healing modalities. And then in May, we have a summit on UFO and extraterrestrials and connecting in. So I invite you to explore those upcoming summits. Some of them are free, and also the webinars. And if you feel called to deepen your connection through energetic alignment, check out Kelvin and what he has offered. And also check out our founder, Sheila Seppi, who has Monday night transmissions every week. So check those out through sheilaseppi.com.
Well, one thing I want to mention,
Sure.
it's very new. I just started a Substack, so people should subscribe for free. It's no charge. I don't require people pay. So it's for free. Go to substack.com, type my name in, Kelvin Chin, and my Substack publication is called Turning Within. But I talk about not just meditation, articles and posts and videos, not just about meditation, but also about afterlife, reincarnation, and overcoming the fear of death. So people should subscribe. Find me on substack.com and look for me.
I think I put it over in the webinar chat, Kelvin. So
Great.
before we close, everybody, you might want to copy off those links. I put all of Kelvin's links over there in the webinar chat.
Yeah.
So you might want to copy those off.
Just
And you can always Google him, you can find him on the internet.
Yeah, it's the Substack I literally started a week or two ago. So I'm just
Okay.
going. So that's why I thought, oh, I should mention Substack. Yeah.
Something new. Well,
Mm.
speaking of that, our next guest next Tuesday is our founder, Sheila Seppi, and she's going to be talking to us about the living light. So I hope that you'll join us next Tuesday. And of course, I'm Patricia Walls, if you haven't caught that by now. And thank you again, Kelvin. It's always enjoyable to chat with you. I
Great to see you.
always learn something new. So I look forward to seeing all of you on the internet. Have a great day.